My game of the day from round 2 of the Biel Grandmaster Tournament is Pentala Harikrishna against Anish Giri. Of course, Giri lost in round 1. Let's see how he reacts to that in the game today. So, Harikrishna with the white pieces. And this opening looks like it's played between two patzers, actually. You can see the way they're developing their pieces. Of course, if you want to play the Italian in a more interesting way, instead of playing the knight to c3, it's possible to play the pawn to c3. But okay, let's see how this one went. I mean, this opening was played, these exact moves played many times, going right back to the 19th century. And it's a decent way for white to play, actually. It's not that bad. Now, here's a little trick. If the bishop drops back to h4, then g5 will lock the bishop out of play. And this is possible because black's king hasn't castled. So here, white exchanges on f6. Now, at first this looks just absolutely fine for black because he has the two bishops. But white gains time. And with this little initiative, it's, well, black has to take a little bit of care, actually. For example, if castles, then d4, and I remember looking at a very nice game a few years ago between Vallejo and Itheta, two Spanish players, which went like this, and suddenly white has this very dangerous initiative. But, of course, Giri is aware of this kind of thing. It was clear that he wanted to keep some juice in the position. He wanted the opportunity to try to play for a win. The known move here is knight e7, and this is very respectable. Black exchanges off this knight on d5, or drives it back, and black shouldn't have any problems, but maybe there's not enough in the position. So instead he played a6. I think it's a more dynamic idea. He gave up the centre, dropped the bishop back on a7. Now, actually black has no real pawn weaknesses here. These two pawns in the middle can sometimes be vulnerable. So, it's an unbalanced position now. This is what Giri wants from the opening. Black has a kind of threat here, and that's to play bishop g4. So a popular move in this position is to play h3, but the problem is that after this, well, black exchanges off the knight on d5 or drives it back and has no real problems. So Harikrishna tried an interesting idea. He played rook c1. Now the idea is to prevent knight e7 if, whoops, excuse me, I'm leaping around, just a moment, if knight e7 here, then knight takes pawn check wins a lump because there's a discovered attack on the queen with bishop takes f7 after. So this prevents black freeing his game. So Giri castled. And now here's the other idea behind rook c1, that it uncovers an attack here. Of course, if that bishop is taken, then rook c6 would be unpleasant for black. Now, if black wanted to trade off, then he could play like this. And this has been played before, and actually black has no real difficulties in here. But as I said before, it's clear from Giri's choice of opening variation, he wanted to keep something in the position, he wanted to keep some tension. So he played rook e8, and I think it's a good move. If the bishop drops back to defend the e-pawn, then bishop g4 is very comfortable for black. So Harikrishna castled. So black wins the pawn back, and the bishop came back to d3. And after the game, Giri said that around here, he felt that a draw would be the sort of correct outcome of the open. You can see that the players actually repeated moves here. But But here Harikrishna decided to play on. He could have repeated with knight d5. Instead, he played bishop c4. So what he spied is that black, after, well, this e-pawn has disappeared, black has slight weaknesses on these light squares, and perhaps white can try to get some kind of attack either on this diagonal or this diagonal. So this was Harikrishna's hope. I think a good move now from Giri. He simply nudged the rook back. It's a very confident move, actually, taking the rook away from the open file, but solidly protecting the pawn on f7. And white can't do too much here. Rook e1, reasonable move, and knight e7 covers a lot of these light squares in the position, and g6 as well, and also starts to prepare c6, again covering a lot of light squares and basically nullifying any pressure on the c-file. And here Giri lashed out with b5 on the queen side, gaining space. I think that's a clear indication that, you know, he wants to play for a win here. I mean, I quite like g6 to plug these light squares on the king side, and, you know, possibly king g7 afterwards. But okay, b5 is certainly not a bad move. h3, white builds up. Bishop b6, so black is starting to straighten himself out. This can be a very useful move, actually. Sometimes this rook on a8 can cover along the 7th rank. Okay, bishop c2, threatening mate on h7, of course. Now, g6 is possible. It doesn't solve all black's problems, but Giri instead played this highly committal move, f5. Well, if black can get away with this, then fine. You know, white's knights aren't particularly well placed. They don't have any real squares to head for, and black is closing out the bishop on c2. But I think at this point, well, both players are just going for it. Harikrishna played g4. Playing f5, of course, is a very risky move because it opens, you know, diagonals towards the king. But Giri said that he was encouraged to go for it because Harikrishna had already used up a lot of time. So, you know, Giri had a chance. Okay, so he closes the diagonal. And Harikrishna opens. Now, if pawn takes, then the king will move to the side, and you know, white has chances on the g file. So knight takes, and knight takes. Now, if bishop takes, which looks like the most natural move, then this check is very annoying, and that uncovers the diagonal here. But also, you can see that this pawn is vulnerable, so white is probably better there. So instead, Giri played g takes f5. But okay, he was happy to keep the two bishops, but black's king is open. It's dangerous. So Giri is risking quite a lot here. King came to the side, and bishop e6. Excellent move from Harikrishna. Of course, he wants to trade those bishops and try to get in on c6. Rook f6, probably a good move from Giri. And, well, if white trades on d7, then you can see then this rook could swing over to the king side, and, you know, things are changing. So d5, good move from Harikrishna. Now, it seems as though black's move taking on d5 seems the most sensible. It's interesting, my computer recommends c5 and thinks that black has a clear advantage. Well, maybe with some very precise moves that's possible, but this looks such an inhuman move because it leaves this bishop locked in on e6, supported by the d-pawn, and I can well understand why Giri declined to play c5, because it seems as though white with this bishop on e6 is doing pretty well. But okay, black, I guess, has his trumps on the queen side with these nice pawns and possibly the pawn coming to c4. But okay, that's a very, very double-edged way to play, and I completely understand why Giri exchanged on d5. The best practical move. And, well, both players were agreed after the game that black should be okay here. You know, he's trading pieces. But it is very double-edged. Here, for example, if queen c5, well, this is way too risky. The knight comes in, and don't forget there's a rook that can come in on e7. Giri played correctly. He played queen f8. Knight came into e6, and, well, again, both players were in agreement after the game that both thought that black should now compromise and just exchange off this knight and then take on f2. And after this exchange of pieces, well, there's really nothing to play for. It's dead equal. But Giri was still playing for the win. He could see that Harikrishna was running very, very short of time. Basically, he was down to just this 30-second increment for his move. So Giri played for the win. He kept the two bishops. Here, this is still okay for black. If he plays bishop a5 here, but Giri was gambling, and now he should keep his rook on the g file, and he's still okay. But rook c8 was a terrible mistake, because now white attacks on the g file. You can see black can't return with his rook, and it's all over. If bishop takes f2, then rook e7 is completely winning. If the queen takes the rook, then check, and it's mates. So Giri covered with his bishop, but now white just enters on the g file. It's all over. Bishop e7 was tried, and now Harikrishna has reached the time control, so he had time to consider his next move, but it really wasn't that difficult to see. After rook g6, Anish Giri resigned the position. If the queen goes backwards, then bishop g8. If this is taken, then queen h6 is mate. And if king h8, then bishop e6 is the best move in this position. Well, white not only threatens rook h6 and certain mate, but also bishop takes d7, and it's all over. So Anish Giri, for many people one of the favourites in this tournament, has started with 2 losses. Quite shocking. I mean, maybe he was just risking too much, but okay, one of his great strengths is that he's fearless, and you know, he's prepared to risk all in order to gain so much. So, well, he was a bit unlucky. But Harikrishna now shares first. He has 1.5 points, along with Ho Yifan and Radoslav Wojtaszek. If you want to see some short interviews with the players, then do check out the other clip on my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.